Hey guys, back for another matchup VOD. This time we're going to try some Death and Taxes. This is a deck that has definitely picked up in play since the printing of Skyclave Apparition. It also had its coming out party this weekend at Eternal Weekend, where on the Friday night event, the Caracas event, it had 2 copies in the top 8. On Saturday, it very appropriately won the Saturday event for a Rishadan Port painting. And then it had some very solid finishes on Sunday in numbers too. So it's definitely a deck that you should expect to face more often in leagues, challenges, and other events. And considering that the general consensus is it's one of the Turbo Depths' harder matchups. So it's a good time to go through it. I think Death and Taxes, most people will definitely say Death and Taxes is favored. But at the same time, it is I think XJ Cloud described it as walking a tightrope. So like even a very subtle mistake or sequencing error on their end can get them killed very quickly. And I agree with that sentiment. So we're going to kind of go over games and see how we can maximize our windows and spots, or talk about specific situations that are likely to come up here and there. So I had a couple of matches picked out. We'll try and go through those. I also played against it 3 times at Eternal Weekend. The one event I was able to play in, the Caracas event on Friday. So I'll try and go through a couple of those games too if it doesn't take too long. Okay, so in the first match, didn't know what the opponent was on, so this is a mulligan decision in the dark. We're on the draw. Sand has all the mana requirements. It has the most important piece in the Dark Depths. It has a crop rotation that can get the other half of the combo if we don't draw a Hex Mage. 2 pieces of disruption and discard. Step in hand's kind of awkward because if we do draw the secondary combo piece, either the Hex Mage or the stage, crop rotation can't be a protection piece from Swords or Bounce or Oko or whatever. But you never know, we might run into Ice Fang Quaddle or Flicker Wisp, or even, something like Birds of Paradise out of like a Maverick style deck where the step would be relevant for pushing through a blocker, or even a Delver for that matter. So it's a pretty solid keep in the dark. The opponent starts Plains Go, and it's not a snow-covered Plains, so chances are it's just Death and Taxes. Our draw for the turn is a Lotus Petal, which is great, because that allows us to, if the player gets a little antsy on the other side and just fires off a Wasteland immediately, we can protect whichever land we choose to, which kind of gives us a little bit more freedom to just grab a dual land here too, because we're not worried about the Wasteland at all. So we fire off the Thoughtseize, and right off the bat it's a really interesting decision. So we have the option to take Swords into Swords, since we have the follow-up Duress on turn 2, and just try and kill them as soon as possible. The issue here is, since they were on the play, we don't currently have a way to combo before our turn 3, so most likely their end step on their turn 4, which means Mystic Stoneforge can come down on 2 and grab Batterskull. At the end of our 3rd turn, it can put the Batterskull in, and then they get an attack and go to 24 before we can combo, barring drawing another piece of acceleration or something that'll speed us up, like a second crop rotation or a Vampire Hex Mage. But we can't bank on drawing that, so we have to make the decision based on the likelihood that they would get a hit in with the Batterskull, which makes things really awkward. We can't protect from anything that comes off of the top of their deck due to this step being in hand. So another Swords or a Flicker Wisp, unless we draw exactly Not of This World, would cleanly, even Caracas, all of these cards are going to cleanly answer the 20/20, since we have to leave it in play for 2 turns. Like even with an end step combo, if they're at 24, we have to hit them twice. So they have quite a few draw steps between now and then to find basically anything. Even, I don't think they generally run Council's Judgment, but there's a bunch of weird scenarios where it's just really bad having to protect Lodge over a 2-turn period of time, and just giving them the extra draw step too. So as weird as it is, I like taking the Stoneforge Mystic here. It blunts their clock entirely. They don't have a vial. They don't have any mana denial. So they're going to be strongly encouraged at some point to tap their mana. And if they don't because they're threatened under the combo, that's good for us too. So I think this gives us the most time, and we can just hope to draw additional discard, Not of This World, those kind of things, and play it from there. So I think the Stoneforge is the call here. So I think we also play out the Petal here because they are a Thalia deck, so Thalia off the top. We don't really want them taxing our mana. So for their second turn, their draw for the turn was Mother of Urns because that wasn't in their hand previously, so we still know their entire hand. So the second crop rotation is a great draw. So what that allows us to do is play Dark Depths and pass, and then if they ever tap out, we can Crop Rot off the Bayou to get Urborg, and then float double black off the Urborg and the Dark Depths, and crop rotation off the Petal, sacrificing the Urborg with the 2 black floating to get stage, and then use that 2 black that was floating to copy Depths and make a 20/20. So they're the Rishadan Port deck in this matchup, but we're now in a position, this is a common thing for Depths that you really want, especially against like decks like this and Control, where you want to be in a spot where you're virtual porting them, where they have to leave mana up or they might just die. And in this case, we even know that a flying blocker wouldn't do anything because we have step in hand. So this is a great spot to be in. We don't have any rush to fire off the Duress because we know they have 2 swords. And next turn, we're just going to be able to play this Swamp, Duress them, and still have the threat of the combo up. And it's not super sneaky because they probably wouldn't put us on double crop rotation, but they could easily put us on 1 crop rotation and a Spirit Guide. So they may respect this line regardless, but it's still doing work because they can't develop at all and they don't have a vial to really get themselves closer to pressuring us while leaving mana open. So they just draw go. We draw a 3rd crop rotation, which isn't particularly useful here, but we will fire off the Duress. So the new card they drew that we didn't know about was Flicker Wisp, which is pretty good for them because if they draw the 3rd land, they're going to be able to deploy the threat and flicker one of their planes to still have swords up. But there's not much we can do about that. So we just take one of the swords and pass, doing the same thing, putting them in a spot where if they tap out for anything other than the Flicker Wisp, they die. So they do draw the land, they do play the Flicker Wisp, and they do bounce their own planes, which is unfortunate. So we can't do anything here because of the known swords. So we just go to our turn. So the Needle's an interesting draw. So on its face, we know they have this sort of Fire Ice in hand. I think a natural inclination would be to name cards that would really put us in a questionable position. So like they have 4 copies of Wasteland, 3 copies of Karakas. So those are ones that immediately come to mind as options. Here I actually like naming this sort of Fire and Ice for a couple of different reasons. Besides the obvious one that it's in their hand, if they draw any land off the top, so say a Rishadan Port or just another basic plains, they can safely play the sword, leaving Plow up, and the following turn, now suddenly they have a draw engine going. And given the number of problematic cards they have in their deck, that's just going to be a big issue. The other piece is kind of a little bit more minor, but it's you're kind of like, sometimes you're just trying to sell someone on a narrative. So in this case, by needling Sword, I'm kind of saying that I think the game's going to go a couple additional turns, and I don't want them drawing cards. So that message may I don't think it's like a for sure thing, but it might entice them to make a different play or make another play to try and put pressure on us, or at least think that they're safe from dying, which, given this board state, is reasonable. So if we tap one of our lands to play the Needle and Needle Sword, from their perspective, for us to beat them, we would need 3 specific cards. We would either need an Elvish Spirit Guide and a crop rotation to combo, or 2 crop rotations to combo if they see that line. And then on top of that, we would need another tutor or the step to get through their Mother of Runes with protection from black and their flyer. And the tutor can't be Sylvan Scrying, because if we comboed like that, we'd be losing the Petal and 2 of our lands, so we would only be on 1 land. So we're going to be showing 4 cards, and we would need to have exactly 3 cards in some combination to beat them. So I don't think it would even be that unreasonable for them to get the read that they're probably not in danger of dying. So I think this kind of like helps sell that narrative a little bit. So for their turn, they do in fact tap out for Recruiter, and that opens the door. And fortunately for us, we do have 3 of the necessary 4 cards to punish them. So we can Crop Rot into the Urborg, float the 2 black like we talked about earlier, and then Crop Rot for the stage. And combo that way. And then we have this Shiri Step to get through their flying blocker. So kind of a fortunate game, the way it played out, but it's a couple of the common strategies that we want to try and deploy came up, specifically like the threat of the combo preventing them from developing their board, and certain interesting discards choices as far as things that may not on their face be the obvious choice. Like I think the generic default choice will often be just taking the removal spells, but sometimes there's ways that just put us into a little bit of a better spot. I think that was one of them. So before we go to game 2 of this match, I think it's I think I forgot to do this in one of the other ones. So talk about sideboard strategy real quick. I know from the Death and Taxes side, at least for the JRXJ Cloud version, the sideboard strat he's currently employing is to bring in a couple of extra copies of Path to Exile for additional lodge removal, Sanctum Prelate, a Council's Judgment, and a Surgical Extraction. So it's just good to be aware of what's coming in, to play around it when we can. Sometimes we won't be able to, and we'll just get got by something like a Surgical after a Wasteland, but we'll just try and sequence our lands, being aware of that. What they're boarding out currently is a couple of Spirit of the Labyrinths and 3 copies of Thalia. So that's also good to know about. On our end, from the Turbo Depth side, the way I've been approaching it is to board down a couple pieces of Acceleration, some Duress, and Bojuka Bog, which doesn't really have text in the matchup other than being a land. And we're bringing in a couple of Catch-All Decays that can hit their Vials and their random creatures and move a Flicker Wisp out of the way if they don't have a mom. And 3 copies of Sylvan Safekeeper, which is just one of the best cards we have access to against Death and Taxes. It shuts off Karakas, or helps against Karakas, helps against Swords, Path. Basically all the non-Wasteland, non-Council's Judgment cards. It's pretty good. Some versions of it, I don't currently, but some versions have Sylvan Library, which is pretty good against the Swords to Plowshare deck too, which is also fair. Some versions also have a 1-of copy of Collector Oof, which is okay, not great in this matchup. Shuts off the Vial, shuts off some of the other equipment. Some versions have like a Feast of Famine floating around in the 75, but they definitely have a Sword of Fire and Ice and a Jitte that it can shut off, so it's pretty good. It's not great because a lot of times Stoneforge is just going to get Batterskull at the beginning anyway, if they're out in front. If they need to hit immediately, maybe they do get a Jitte, but it's okay. So that's an option as well if you have it. So this is a game 2 hand that's slow, but fine. It has, there's a couple of different kinds of hands that I'm really looking for in the match. You're looking for something that's either really fast with something else going for it. So say you have Needle or Thoughtseize on 1 into turn 2 combo, or turn 2 combo with Not of This World. Something that can pressure them really fast or really early, or absent that, something with a path to the combo that, although it might be slower, like this hand, has a bunch of different interactions. So in this case, we're going to be able to hand check them or take them off a threat with Inquisition. We're going to be able to needle one of their problematic lands or Vial, and then we have a couple of tutors and we have a piece of acceleration, and one of the lands is Ghost Quarter too. So if we need to needle one thing and answer a land on top of that, we've kind of got that covered too. And even though we only have 2 lands, if they do go after us early with a Wasteland, we have the Spirit Guide specifically for crop rotation to help protect. And we're on the draw, so I think this hand it meets the qualifications of what we're looking to do in the matchup. So they start with Plains Pass. Because we drew the second Catacombs, and because we have the Spirit Guide crop rotation, I'm not worried about getting a land wastelanded at all, so I'm not going to bother fetching basics here. I think it's completely reasonable to just spam Bayous. If they fire off Wastelands and we have extra colored lands, they're doing us a favor. Anytime a Wasteland is hitting a non-combo land, I'm generally pretty happy about that. There are going to be games where we only have one source and maybe like an acceleration piece, and we definitely want to get like a basic forest to make sure we can resolve our like Sylvan Scryings and tutors and Reclaimer and stuff like that, but this isn't one of those games. So here the decision is needle versus discard, and almost every time except in what I was just referring to where our hand might fall apart to a Wasteland, like say our hand is just like Urborg Depths and those are our mana sources, that's the only time I would consider firing off a needle in the dark Wasteland. I think the information's way too valuable. Stopping their key 2 drops is way too valuable at some times with the Stoneforge Mystic, if that ends up being the correct take, and just knowing what to needle. So there's just so many needle targets in this deck. Like obviously the big ones are Karakas Wasteland and Aether Vial, but there are definitely times where it's right to name Mother of Runes, Stoneforge Mystic, Rishadan Port, even specific pieces of equipment. So I think it's just too important to maximize the value to not lead with the discard spells in these kind of situations. So they're heavy on the mana denial, this hand, and they have Revoker and Disenchant. The Revoker is probably going to name, if they spam it early, it'll probably name Vampire Hexmage, which is fine because it doesn't look like we're going to be going that way this game. If they wait and port us instead, they're probably going to catch our Reclaimer, but I think that's also fine. I think the Swords is just a much bigger headache, so I think that's the card we take here. So we did have the option there of using Spirit Guide to needle Wasteland, but that doesn't make any sense when they're holding a Disenchant in hand and they can just get rid of it. So here the opponent drew Stoneforge Mystic off the top and fetched Batterskull, which is a pretty good draw for them. That's a pretty good draw for us in Dark Depths. So here we're already threatening to be able to go next turn, but that's unlikely with the Rishadan Port, but we will have Land Depths, Spirit Guide for stage if things go in a different way. Here, though, we're in a similar situation where we're not going to be able to get under the Batterskull. So I think the Needle is kind of earmarked for Stoneforge Mystic because we really don't want that coming into play next turn. If they choose to not port us and disenchant instead, that's fine. Then we'll have the combo up and we can get under the Batterskull that way, possibly. But either way, we don't want them going over 20 if at all possible. And also, play out the Reclaimer here, because if they choose to use their turn playing the Revoker, we're fine with that too. So they play the Wasteland, they play the Revoker, and name the Reclaimer as expected. Second crop rotation is also very good. So this is a spot where they're probably not going to be able to attack for fear of crop rotation. We already have 2 lands in the graveyard, and Reclaimer would become a 3/4. So this is doing a really good job at brick walling their board. And at the same time, if they fear double crop rotation or fear Spirit Guide plus crop rotation, again, we're into the territory where we're locking down their mana sources. So this Wasteland's kind of just spoken for indefinitely. So they play another Plains and pass. During our upkeep, they port the Bayou. So this is a spot where we want to have the ability to threaten them with the combo. So I think it's correct to crop rot here. There's nothing that can go horribly wrong for us in this spot. If they choose to Wasteland the Depths in response to us rotating, we can rotate again and replace the Depths. And combo anyway if we choose to. If they wait and let it resolve, then we're going to have Stage Depths and either crop rotation or Spirit Guide to combo as well. So there's really no downside. We need to get the stage here anyway. So we get the stage. They choose not to Wasteland, which I think is correct. You don't want to be using your Wastelands into open green mana if at all possible. So we draw another Verdant Catacombs, which we don't particularly need. So we just play the Ghost Quarter. So the question is when the appropriate time to combo is. If we did not have the second crop rotation, I would probably just go for it here. The reason being is that they're going to have 2 Rishadan ports on their turn, or at least 1 plus another problem land. So what can happen is if we let them untap is if we Ghost Quarter Wasteland, they can port the stage before the Ghost Quarter resolves, and then we can't really do anything. But since we have the crop rotation, if that happens, the ports can't really stop us because we can float mana off the stage, let the port ability resolve on the stage, wait to see what they do with the Wasteland in response to the Ghost Quarter activation. If they activate it, then we can crop rot and combo. If they don't, that's also fine. So basically what would happen is at the end of whenever they decide what they're going to do with their Wasteland, we crop rotation for a replacement stage and combo. So we can combo through 1 or 2 ports and Wasteland at will. What waiting allows us to do is play around sorcery speed effects. So we're not going to get got by a Council's Judgment since this is post-board, or sorcery speed Flicker Wisp, or just even if they just play Karakas, that would blow us out if we went for it in advance. We'll at least see it and know we have to wait. So I think it is absolutely correct in this spot to, despite the ports, to just pass. If they draw a second Wasteland, that's obviously bad, but I think there's more negative cards that can happen than positive cards. So here they play the second port. And they pass it back to us. So the real question in these kind of spots is it getting better for us? They have 2 unknown cards. The problem is they're going to put us to the test basically on each of our upkeeps, because they're just going to start double porting us. And at that point, we're just giving them more draws and more looks, and we're not going to actually be able to deploy Disruption at any reasonable rate. Like, we're not going to be able to cast Discard without taking the ability to threaten the combo down if we're getting double ported. And the only real interaction we could draw off the top that would help us is like specifically Not of This World. I don't think that's really a reasonable spot. You could make an argument that we could combo during our upkeep, but even then we don't have, without having to use the crop rotation, but even then we don't have the ability to protect it. So if they have an instant speed play, it's still going to get us. So I think this is definitely the right spot to go. And you just have to roll the dice on the last couple of cards. So we fire off the Wasteland or the Ghost Quarter on the Wasteland. So they port the stage as expected. We float the colorless mana. Let that resolve. Let them make the decision on the Wasteland. They go to Wasteland the Depths, which we crop rotate the Bayou into the second stage, and use the floating mana and the Spirit Guide to combo. And fortunately, they do not have the answer. I mean, that's the kind of game that could go either way. They could have easily drawn a Swords or a Path, and they just didn't. So you chalk it up to a little bit of luck there, or a little bit of good fortune. So second match here, also in the dark. This is the kind of hand I would never send back. It's a Claim turn 3 with protection on both ends, so we can straight up Thoughtseize on the play off of a swamp, get full information. Depending on the matchup, if it's if we see a Wasteland, or if it's like a Delver type matchup, we can just play stage out on turn 2. And if they go to Wasteland the stage, we have Spirit Guide to copy the basic swamp with our stage and fizzle it. If not, we just go to turn 3 and have the combo with the acceleration up. And then we have a Not of This World for protection too on the back end. So this isn't the kind of hand I would send back, ever. So in this particular spot, this is the reverse example of before. Before, when the opponent was on the play in both games, the Stoneforge Mystic was a much bigger threat because we didn't have the ability to combo before equipment could come down and start making things messy with multiple attack phases and life gain. Here, we're going to we already have the ability to cleanly get under the Stoneforge Mystic. During that section of time, they're going to have to choose between playing the Mystic and porting us too, which means it might not even come down right away. Thalia, we don't have to play a spell to get under it. It could become slightly annoying if they play exactly Thalia on turn 2, and then we set up for the combo and they have Karakas. We wouldn't have the mana to pay for to be able to cast Not of This World and pay 1. So that could be rough, but we could always just wait a turn and try to draw additional lands, additional mana. So I think the clear take here, and given no Vial, we're not really worried about Flicker Whisper, Sanctum Prelate yet. So I think the easy take here is Swords. So Plains go on their side. For our turn, we draw an Urborg. I don't know that that's going to be relevant, but it's always good to have additional lands. So the question is the sequencing of the lands here. is stage versus depths. I think it's always better to play the depths. Yes, it would be unfortunate if they drew Wasteland and Wastelanded it. But even if that happens, we have the Spirit Guide plus Sylvan Scrying to go tutor for another one, so that wouldn't be the end of the world. But the bigger problem is the Rishadan port. We can't play out, in these matchups it's really risky to play out the stage, because they could just start upkeep porting the stage, which forces us to combo during our upkeep, or whenever they decide to port it, or give up the ability to upkeep or to combo for the entire turn. And that can just open us up to all sorts of problems. Like, we know they have Flicker Wisp in their hand. They could draw other problematic cards to go along with it. And we just don't want to be main phasing a 2020 unless like there's something like a Wasteland that's forcing us to do so, and we have the option to do it this way. And if they port our swamp, no harm, no foul. If they choose to develop by making one of the other plays in their hand, that's great. We can just play the stage and have that combo up. But we don't want to give them the option to port our stage and delay us by multiple turns and then force us to upkeep or make it on our turn. Okay, so they do choose to develop and play the Stoneforge and grab the Batterskull. So Petal's actually a great draw. What this does is one of their outs from this position, based on the 6 cards we know they have in their hand, or 5 of the 6 we know they have in their hand, is if they drew exactly Karakas, they would be able to play Thalia, Karakas Pass, and if we had just Stage Swamp Depth Spirit Guide, we'd have to tap out to combo, and we wouldn't be able to pay the extra one for the Not of This World. But now that we have the Lotus Petal, that works. It kind of gives them a little bit of free information, because maybe they wouldn't have played around us going for it, and maybe they just would have like cast a Prelate or something. I don't know. Maybe they wouldn't have played their turn the same way if they have 100% information, but I think it's absolutely correct to not mess around and just have the full protection. So since we know almost all of the cards in their hand, besides one, we know that it would basically take Double Swords to Plowshares or Swords plus Karakas to beat us from this spot off the top, and they're 2 draw steps. So that's really unlikely. What's way more likely is that they just draw a Wasteland off the top, and that's going to take us a little bit longer to play through. A couple of turns we would have to untap, play Urborg, and Scrying for Ghost Quarter to get through that, and that would buy them a lot of time, and we probably want the Scrying to get through the Flicker Wisp if they play it anyway. So Wasteland's the card we want to play around in this spot. So they try to Flicker Wisp the token. One question that comes up a lot is Not of This World versus Sylvan Safekeeper, and the setup where Not of This World's in the main deck. And a big part of the reason is exactly situations like this. So if in this exact game we would have had Sylvan Safekeeper, we could have had it in play with the Spirit Guide. So if this was a Sylvan Safekeeper, we could have had it in play and sacrifice our swamp to protect it, which would have had the same net effect this turn. What would be an issue is that we wouldn't be able to actually Scrying for a Sujiri Step on our turn. But since we have the free spell, and against the Thalia deck, and port free versus 1 is a big deal, and especially versus decks like Delver, where if you wait to deploy the Safekeeper to the combo turn, you risk Daze messing your combo turn up. If you play it early, you risk Lightning Bolts turning into Stone Rains pointing at it. So as a main deck card, I think the 0 versus 1 is a big deal, especially in a deck that's mana is designed to be extremely tight for a deck starting with 8 colorless sources. And the Safekeepers can come in matchups where you think it's going to go a little bit longer. So like against your control decks and your Miracles and your Snow and stuff like that. The Safekeepers, you're going to have, your mana's not going to be under attack as much unless they have something weird like Back to Basics. And you're going to have more time to develop and hit your land drops than against a deck like this where we don't want to give them that much time. We want to maximize our windows. So this is the exact kind of situation where Not of This World shows exactly its full worth. So we're able to protect that, and then we're able to use the free green source to get Sejiri Step and give protection from white and go through. So in this particular match, I did choose to bring in the Collector Ouphe. It's not a thrilling card, but I think it has decent enough applications that I've been testing it. It's something I may stop bringing in the future, but for now it's okay. This hand is not great, but it's not something we can turn away either. We basically have the full combo plus acceleration plus an extra crop rotation for protection. We can't really interact with them when I discard to proactively stop them from whatever their initial game plan is or strip them of answers. Maybe Collector Ouphe messes with an Aether Vial or a piece of equipment, but other than that, we're kind of just giving them 3 or 4 turns to set up their defenses isn't great, but again, full combo plus protection tutor, it's kind of hard to say no to. So they start off with the Mother of Runes. Verdant Catacombs was not what we were particularly looking for there, so it's just Bayou Pass. So they play a Port and Stoneforge for Batterskull again. So Not of This World is solid, so if we can avoid getting our lands messed with too much, we should be in decent shape here. So in this spot, I'm pretty sure I make a mistake. I think the Collector Ouphe is supposed to just be in play there. Not 100% sure what I was thinking at the time. Maybe I was thinking there was some sort of way to threaten killing them, but that would require like double Spirit Guide. So I don't think that's something they'd be afraid of, and I probably should have played the stage if I wanted to make that more of a threat. So they play another Plains and pass. We draw a Thoughtseize, which is a pretty good draw. So really interesting decision from the opponent here, in that they chose not to activate the Stoneforge Mystic. So this is a really difficult decision. I think you could justify taking every card in this hand. The Sword of Fire and Ice is a problem because we really don't want them drawing cards. The Council's Judgment is an issue if they gain life or manage to survive a turn. That could cause us all kinds of problems. The Batterskull would gain them that life and give them the additional time. And the Path is just a clean removal spell, which we have the Not of This World for, but it's entirely possible that they just find another problem card in the next turn or two. So it's hard. We could make the argument that the Ouphe shuts off the Sword of Fire and Ice, but they could technically path that too, if they need to. So I think this is actually really hard. What I ended up doing is taking the Batterskull. I think giving them a guaranteed extra turn is just not where we want to be, especially if they could use that turn at the very worst to put a sword on it and draw an extra card and gain life to get an extra turn. I don't think that's someplace we want to be. So be curious if any of you guys have any thoughts on what you would take here, but I ended up taking the Batterskull. So from here we have the option of either playing the oof or passing. I like passing here because now we actually do have a sneaky combo up. We have the ability to crop rotate a Bayou into Depths and then exile a Spirit Guide to crop rotate the other Bayou into Urborg, and then we could combo block and eat their well, they're not Batterskull. Block and eat their attacker if they put a Sword of Fire and Ice in, or force them to tap the Mom to draw a card. We have the Knot of this World for the Path to Exile. So I basically liked the threat of the combo. So they chose to put Sword of Fire and Ice into play at the end of the turn. So when they attack, we go for it. They very wisely tap their port to tap our stage to prevent us from doing so. I think this is still pretty good for us. I mean, it's not great that they're drawing the extra card, but now we don't have to worry about their port, and we have extra protection up on our turn. So they swing in again. In this case, we basically don't have a choice but to take the hit due to the Council's Judgment. So last turn there wasn't a threat of 3 mana plus Council's Judgment. This turn there is. So they do get the clean hit in without having to use their mother. So at this point, with double protection, it's not getting better. This is our spot to go. We know half of their hand. There's just 3 random draws over the last 2 turns. So in this spot, there's no need to waste 2 resources to protect from this one. We just have 1, so we just fire off the Knot of this World. They port our Bayou, no need to do anything there. We draw another crop rotation. So this is an extremely heads-up play from the opponent. One of the new cards they drew was Swords to Plowshares, and if they had appointed it at the 2020, they would have lost the game on the spot. However, they chose to point it at their Stoneforge Mystic to gain 3 life. What's really interesting about this is if they had pointed it at the Mother of Runes instead, it would have made either of our other two creatures lethal in that spot. But this was just a really, really heads-up play by the opponent. So we play the Oof to shut down the sword on the back end. So we get got by the Council's Judgment. Just really strong sequencing from the opponent. So here we draw a Needle. So we could Needle the Mother of Urns and try and get in there and either force a chump block or put them to 1. The other alternative is to threaten the combo again. So the likelihood that the Oof is going to kill them over the next 2 turns seems not great. I also think if we Needle the Mother of Urns, they're very likely to chump block. And if we don't Needle the Mother of Urns, they're just going to block and give it protection from green. So I like the idea of just, forcing them to do that and leaving the combo up again and seeing how it plays out. So here they play Sanctum Prelate, which is a really interesting dynamic. We obviously can't let that come in. I don't know that they would name 1 because it does shut off a lot of their answers to a 20/20, but we can't exactly risk that because we're in a bad spot if that does happen. So the choice is between firing off one of them and both of them. So chose to basically go for it on this particular turn again. And they found another Swords to Plowshares. And from this spot, I conceded. It's obviously more game to go with 20 plus life, but this just didn't feel like a spot that I was coming back from. But definitely, these kind of games just happen from time to time. They have such a high density, especially post-board, of games where their interaction is just very, very dense, I guess is the best way to put it. So we're going on 45 minutes. I'm going to try and go through a couple of these Eternal Weekend games really quickly. And then call it. Almost more like an overview. So this was in round 6. We won the roll. So again, on the dark, I've never played this opponent before. Didn't recognize the username. This is kind of risky, but it feels like a turn 3 with double protection. If any green swords comes off the top in the first 3 turns, it's pretty good. If we draw Hex Mage, the hand is insane. If we draw a discard, it's good. And even if we get Wastelanded or something, any green source puts us right back into a position where we can combo quickly. So the hand definitely has risk, but it's explosive and it has protection, and I like those kind of hands in the dark. So we just go Urborg pass. Our opponent plays Aether Vial on 1. So our draw for the turn is fetch land, which is great. So in this spot, I like playing the fetch land over the depths. There's no reason not to have the crop rotation up in case they decide to fire off a wasteland. So they do have the wasteland. That's literally the best draw in the deck in that spot. So we were really fortunate here. So pretty easy way to sequence this is to just play the Urborg, or play the depths, and then tap the depths in the Urborg for Vampire Hexmage. If they choose to wasteland, we just crop rot the depths into another depths. If they choose to not wasteland, we wait until their upkeep and then crop rotate for Ghost Quarter and Ghost Quarter their wasteland and go for it then with the Aether Vial trigger on the stack before it goes to 2. And then we'll have a 20/20 in play with double protection. So oftentimes you don't get the luxury of just playing the depths and playing the Hexmage because it walks into this, but given the way our hand developed, made it nice and easy to do this. So the amazing part about this is, for as good as our draws were, and as good as this setup is with the Not of This Worlds, they still have outs. So they could easily have a Thalia, which they could Thalia in off of the Aether Vial here, and then have either Swords to Plowshares or a Karakas, and well, there's the Karakas, and we would have lost this game. Luckily, all they had was the Karakas, and we were able to take it. I'm not going to go through game 2 in this match. It was kind of a little bit drawn out. Went to like the 8th turn. They ended up mistiming a wasteland slightly when they thought they had a land drop behind it and did not. So it was a situation where they had a Karakas in play and a second Karakas in hand, and basically they fired off a wasteland. I comboed in response. The Karakas, there was an Out of This World, and then they wanted to play the second Karakas, but they'd already made the land drop. So it's just an unfortunate issue. So this was round 7 of Eternal Weekend. Also did not know what the opponent was on in this round. This hand does absolutely nothing, so that was an automatic mulligan. This hand's a little on the risky side. The mana is not great, but it's got 2 tutors, it's got the depths. The question is what to bottom there. The one card that's kind of loose in this particular hand is the Reclaimer, because we don't have really the lands to activate it. We don't want to really be firing off a Lotus Petal to activate a Reclaimer. The crop rotation is just a lot better here. It's only 1 land away, or 1 mana away from being able to combo. Acceleration would make it a turn 2, Hexmage would make it a turn 2, and then the protection pieces are just better. So this either represents a stage or whatever protection piece we need, and then these are just too solid in the dark. So I think the Reclaimer hits the bottom. So the opponent starts with a turn 1 Vial, which is such an important card in the matchup. It's just, it's the kind of card where, like, as demonstrated in the last game, like, even with double protection, just a simple Vial onto could have caused so many issues. And in this case, I think we're going to be able to set up or engineer sequences where we can beat Wasteland. We can clearly beat Karakas. We have Not of This World or Plow. And we just don't want to get into a situation where they can both leave answers up and have either Vial up as well. So you can make an argument that Wasteland is the correct name here. I don't think we need to do that given the presence of the crop rotation. So the opponent does have the Wasteland. They cast a Stoneforge Mystic for Batterskull as usual. So draw another Hexmage. So there's a couple interesting things here. We're obviously just gonna put the combo on the table. It doesn't come up in this particular game, but one thing that can come up is taking counters off the Aether Vial with the Vampire Hexmage if you have two of them, or if you have the stage combo and a Hexmage. So if they ever get to the point where they have 3 counters off Vial, or even if they have 2 counters on Vial and Thalia would mess up your protection piece, and you have double Hexmage, when they activate it, you can take the counters off. And on resolution, Vial only allows you to put a creature in with the number of counters on the Vial at the time of resolution. So it's just something to keep an eye on that comes up every once in a while. So as far as this situation goes, the Vial's not going to be on 3, so Flicker Wisp is not an issue. If they tap out for Flicker Wisp, the most mana they can have up is 1, which means we'll have crop rotation for step available to get through the blocker and Not of This World. For the trigger, if they... Basically, they need 2 pieces of direct interaction to beat us, whether that's Plow Plow or Plow Karakas. And given the onboard Wasteland, that kind of... By untapping, we would have access to crop rotation too, but that just opens the door for so many issues. Like, once they untap, the crop rotation's basically spoken for anyway, since it has to deal with this Wasteland. So this is a spot where 99 times out of 100, unless I had some weird read on the opponent, I'm just going to go for it and force them to have double interaction. So they swords. Not This World catches that. They have the second swords. So draw a Scrying. So the game could have gone on for a little bit, but we're functionally not coming back from that. Basically, they're going to start hitting us for 5 a turn and go over 20 life. They already have an onboard Wasteland, so we can, if we draw a mana source, we can cobble the combo together again, but we're nowhere near getting through their defenses. I probably should have played this out a little bit more, but may have been a little out of frustration on the double Plow, but it's not even that unlikely for them to have double answers. Like, they do have 4 Plows, they do have 3 Karakas, so to have 2 isn't really that unusual. So in game 2 of this match, basically came down to, I thought I had a Sylvan Safekeeper line set up that they wouldn't be able to beat, and they had a Karakas, but obviously had Safekeeper with a couple extra lands, so I thought it was okay. They had Silent Clearing and played Plague Engineer, killing the Sylvan Safekeeper, and I never drew an answer to Karakas, so they crushed me. So that was an 0-2 loss. That was one of my losses in the event. But very caught off guard by the Plague Engineer post board. So this was round 9. And this will be the last one we'll go through. So this hand doesn't have the green source, but again, there's no way a clear path to the combo with protection is getting shipped in the dark. I did not know what the opponent was on again. That's not always the case. Normally with Magic the Gathering online events, you're going to know some percentage of your opponents. In this one, this was such a huge field and so many new players thanks to the God accounts, which I really, really hope Wizards brings back on a regular occurrence, because 1,700 people in 3 Legacy events is insane, and made for a lot of great stories and, just great tournaments. Like I haven't been that happy during a Legacy event in a while. There was just a lot of interesting things happening, and a lot of new blood, or maybe old blood, coming back to the format and with card accessibility. But in any case, I didn't know the matchup, so this is a keep. If our first Urborg gets wastelanded, which sometimes happens in a lot of matchups, we just have the backup. Any Rain Source off the top is great. Any discard spell is great. Hexmage is great. Like, there's basically very few cards in the deck that are bad draws other than duplicate legendary lands. So we keep this. The opponent starts with Vial. So right off the bat is a duplicate legendary land. Right on cue. So they do in fact go for the early wasteland hand or line. They also play a Mother of Runes. So Urborg go again. So they have a second Vial. One thing to note with the Vials, if the game goes long enough, is if they have a setup with 3 and X, whether that's 1, 2, 3, I mean even 4. I don't think a lot of the versions don't run Palace Jailer anymore, but when one's on 3 and there's another Vial with counters, you just have to be aware of what creatures those represent in the deck, because Recruiter will can come in off the 3, and if they have 3 and 3, then you're looking at Flickerwisp, Prelate, Skyclave, those kind of cards. If you're looking at 2, you really have to watch out for Thalia. Lists don't really run Tomic anymore, so that's not as big of an issue, but watch out for Revoker. Even though it's not run in heavy numbers anymore, the Recruiter can grab the 1/of easily, and if you let a 2 resolve with a Hexmage in play, you're going to be really sad. So just being aware of what the numbers represent, especially if it's 3 and another, is good to keep in mind. So we draw Petal, which is pretty good. So this represents the actual full combo. With the crop rotation, the same play as earlier games with the Spirit Guide, where we're just floating 2 black and comboing. So it's really questionable when the timing should be, and that's often one of the hardest things to correctly identify when playing depths. In this case, I don't think it's reasonable to try and play around Wasteland. There's just way too many things that could happen. They're going into a turn where they could have a 3rd land drop in Flickerwisp. They're going to have a Vial that's ticking up to 3. So they could very easily Recruiter off of the Vial and hardcast a Flickerwisp while bouncing, a Plains, and then have a blocker plus plow up, something like that. There's a lot that can go wrong. We don't have a leftover green at the moment. And if we wait an additional turn, we can use the crop rotation as an additional piece of protection. So we'll just have the full Urborg Depth stage package with 2 pieces of protection instead of 1, or a piece of protection and a unblockable. So I think we definitely take a more wait and see approach. You know, if they do something crazy and tap their Vial down to recruit for something and then hardcast something, then we can obviously win. So we're making them dedicate resources to our combo, but I don't think we really want to walk into a Flicker Wisp, or in this case a Karakas. Draw a 3rd copy of Depths, but I think this is a pretty easy stage go. Can't play around Wasteland because they would get multiple activations out of their Karakas, unless we chose to Ghost Quarter it, but that's kind of sketchy for the same reasons it was sketchy to go for it last turn. So they activate a Vial. There's not too much that could go wrong here, so I think this is fine. They put a Prelate in on 2, which is pretty good. I think 7 would have really hurt us a lot more. 1 obviously just shuts off too much of their interaction, I think, for them to really name that unless they don't have anything. So this probably puts a little bit more weight into them having some kind of instant speed interaction, or at least representing it. So they crash in for 2 and pass. So we have a couple of options here. We could float a couple of black and crop rotate Urborg into a Ghost Quarter and Ghost Quarter the Karakas preemptively, and not have to deal with it on the off chance they can somehow live through the turn if they plow their own creature, that sort of thing. The alternative is we can just go for it, let them Karakas, use the Not of This World there, and then have the crop rotation to protect from whatever their interaction is. The downside is if they Flicker Wisp, it's just going to be a problem. They have the option to wait until the stage, or until we have to sacrifice the depths of the stage. So when we sacrifice the depths and keep the stage, they could Flicker Wisp the land. That would be really bad, but we can't really play around that. Fortunately, that's a line not a lot of players take. Most players just go after the token. So if they do choose to go after the token and force us to crop rotate for step on their end step, that would be kind of bad too. So the one upside is if they wait until our upkeep, which a lot of people do, we would be able to give it protection from white and still get through. I think it would be a mistake for the opponent to do that, but I think it's definitely something we should leave open as a possibility. So I like saving crop rotation on that off chance, because I think we're going to have problems with Flicker Wisp either way, but this gives us a backdoor to beating it if they sequence it in a way where you would think arguably they're forcing us to react during our own turn, where some people might think that's better. So I think that's better. And if they have specifically Karakas and Plow, it doesn't, or Karakas and Path, either or, it doesn't matter, because one's just going to catch one, one's going to catch the other. So I think I like just saving the crop rotation for the backdoor out. So they Caracas, we Not of This World, they Plow. We get protection from white. And fortunately, that's good enough here. Okay, one last game. This was game 2 from round 9. So this hand is not great. It's kind of flooded on mana sources, only one piece of the combo. So I think that's an easy ship. This hand is also not great, but it has the more important piece to the combo. It has some proactive interaction, and it has some protection on the back end, plus Ghost Quarter for their lands. So I think this is a little bit better, and probably better than a random 5, and the depths is the obvious bottom. So, oh, that went by fast. So they went Plains Go. We fired off an Inquisition and saw a hand where we didn't have a choice. It was just double Flicker Wisp, so we take one of the Flicker Wisps. So unfortunately they were working with double Wasteland Caracas, double Flicker Wisp port. So we're going to kind of, buckle in for a bit of a game here. So they play the Port and Pass. Port our Urborg. There's no sense of floating the mana. We obviously can't do anything with it in that spot. Pithing Needle is an amazing draw. So here we're just going to straight up name Wasteland, since they have 2 of them. Playing Ghost Quarter over the Forest, because if we just happen to naturally draw Hexmage next turn, we could play it and have the answer to Caracas on board. Well, an answer to a non-basic land and an answer. So we could Ghost Quarter the Caracas and then have Not of This World in the tank if they happen to draw a Sword or a Path. And if we draw Stage over 2 turns, we could just have the natural combo and the Ghost Quarter for the same thing. So I think that makes more sense than Forest. So we ship it back to them. So they play the Caracas. So over 5 matches, this is the first time that this card has made a significant appearance. In this case, that was a really good top deck. So we had an amazing top deck with the Needle for their double Wasteland, and they returned the favor, which is, one good top deck deserves another, so it's only fair. So now we are in a bit of a spot. So the Scrying is a good draw. I think we basically just want to start slowly working our way through these pieces they have. So the Stage is good for a variety of reasons. We can start just copying, if they don't do anything once the Stage is in play, we can start copying their Wasteland, see if that entices them to fire it off. If they just, obviously it's round 9, really deep in the winner's bracket in a big tournament. I don't expect them to make this kind of mistake, but it's always possible that someone tries to preemptively Wasteland a Stage 2 and walks into it copying a basic land. So that's always a thing to be aware of too. So they play a Wasteland and play a Vial. So luckily their clock isn't too fast yet, and it looks like they're going to, I think the common wisdom, and it's almost always right, is that from the D&T side you should take the most conservative lines possible. Yeah, 95% of the time that's going to be right. But there's other times where you absolutely want to put more pressure on. So this Flicker Wisp in their hand does represent an answer, but they also have 2 Wastelands and a Caracas. So I would strongly consider if I was them. Probably not this turn, but maybe next turn if they can pass with double Wasteland up and then flicker a Karakas, or even flicker a Port or something. I think they probably want to apply a little bit more pressure to cut us off of some draws. But they also have Ports too, so yeah, I think it's fair. So interesting spot here is when they port during your upkeep, I think like the vast majority of the time you should float the green. In this case, I actively want them to wasteland. They'd be doing us a huge favor if they wastelanded. So I prefer not to, and just give them the option to. They probably wouldn't, but you never know. So in this case, they actually do fire off, and they would have the option to do that anyway. So they could just, even if we floated the green, they could just pass to our draw step and wasteland it. So we weren't going to stop that either way. This kind of, I don't think it particularly gives anything away one way or the other if you're just conscious of why you're doing what you're doing, whether or not you have a crop rotation. So here we can't actually protect the stage from their wasteland yet, and we're at least a couple of turns away from getting through what they have. We don't want to play out the stage with their active port until absolutely necessary. For reasons we talked about in the other matchups, they can just start putting us into positions where we have to use it during our upkeep or draw step or end step. But there's probably going to become a point where we don't have a choice in the matter. So they just attack go and port our green source again. So here we're not going to skip our land drop, so we know they have the sandbagged wasteland, so I'm not playing the depths out. I'd much rather them hit the stage than hit the depths. So they take the vial up to 2, attack for another 2, and play the wasteland. Port our stage again. So here we could copy something. We could try to copy our basic forest. We could try to copy our ghost quarter. We could try to copy their wasteland. I think I actually like just waiting. The reason being that we have draws that could get us there through most of what they have. And I kind of want to have as threatening of a mana position as possible. So if they respect, say, double crop rot or crop rot plus an answer or two, maybe it changes their sequencing. So here the decay is a pretty good draw, so we can force them into sorcery speed with their Flicker Wisp now by not allowing them to untap and move the vial to 3. Same reason as last turn with the stage. We're at the point where we can't be skipping land drops. One of the ways we can get through a wasteland is by double comboing, so it's entirely possible that we're going to want to, if we draw a second stage, be able to play it and combo twice, that sort of stuff. So there's active costs to holding this in our hand at this point. And if they fire off the wasteland, then all of our tutors become live. But what we don't want to do is let them put the Flicker Wisp into play for free. So we just hit the Ether Vial here. So they do in fact fire off the wasteland. So that gives us a good number of live draws from this spot. So they recruit up a Stoneforge Mystic. And another one of the live draws, in addition to all the tutors, is the second depths. So had we not played we'd be a turn behind had we not played the depths last turn, because that basically got them to use the wasteland. So that worked out about as well as you could hope for. So here they Flicker Wisp their Recruiter, so they get another Recruiter activation at the end of the turn. So they get another Flicker Wisp. So we're kind of in a spot where we know everything but 2 cards, and this was actually missequenced. So what should have happened here is at the end, or during their main, when they pass in their second main phase, we should have Ghost Quartered then. They could have floated the mana and gotten a second Plains, but the best thing they could have done is play a second Flicker Wisp and untap a Plains, so they would have a Plains untapped, or just let it resolve, move out of their second main and have Plains. The way it was done actually gives them an extra white mana here for no reason. It's likely not going to matter, but just from there are situations where the extra mana could help, so I think it's just functionally better to go after it at the end of their second main if there's nothing else that could punish you. Like, obviously, if they have a land drop, never in a million years do that, because they could just play a second Karakas. But if they've made their land drop like they did, I think it's pretty safe. So we go for it here. They have the Plow. We have the Knot of this World. And then the step gets there. So, yeah, these are just, basically the games that I've played recently with the deck versus Death and Taxes. It's unfortunate that more situations with the Skyclave didn't come up. I think it's really, really strong. Obviously, I got fairly lucky. Had some pretty good draws in some of these matches. Some pretty decent top decks, and they missed when I needed them to in a number of spots. I don't think the results are necessarily indicative of this matchup. I think D&T is still heavily favored, and I think Skyclave is a big problem. It really devalues Needle in the matchup, especially when they have an active Flicker Wisp. Like, if you have Needle Karakas in play, that the Violin 3 represents such a big problem, because now they have such a spread of creatures they could have. It's not just the 3 or 4 Flicker Wisps. Now it's really 6 or 7 or maybe even 8, depending on the list, cards that could come down and bounce or destroy a Needle, or remove your combo land with the Flicker Wisp. I know the Skyclave doesn't hit the land or the token, but it hits enough other things. It could be one more piece that they could point at a Sylvan Safekeeper to just overload you by just that one extra piece. It's just a nice, solid catch-all. Can hit Library if your version's running that. It's just a solid card. So, yeah, these games I didn't really hit Safekeeper much, and they didn't really hit Skyclave too much, or if they did, it wasn't relevant in the situations. I really think, just the biggest thing is just reps. If you get enough reps against D&T, you'll just get a feel for, when the risk reward of each particular situation and what they could have and what their sequencing says, that kind of stuff. Just pick it up over time. I'll probably put a link to an article I put together maybe a year and a half ago, that has like general depths sideboarding strats versus D&T, and a couple of walkthroughs of other matchups, and just generally discussing the matchup in general. And yeah, so this is going to be by far the longest one. I was kind of losing concentration a little bit during this last match, so I hope some of the information in here was useful for those of you who made it through to the end. If you have any other matchups you'd like me to do at some point, let me know. I'm trying to focus more on the ones that might be more difficult. So we've done lands, Esper Vial, Snow, and now D&T. Not sure how useful like going through favorable matchups would be, but if there's any that people think would be good, I'd be up for that. So yeah, for now I'm gonna head out. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and catch you next time.